On Thursday, Nancy and I boarded our ancient Toyota Camry and headed up to Manayunk, where I would soon film Scott Noel starting a portrait of Nancy. Scott has a show of portraits at Gross McLeave Gallery, so it seemed like a good filmic idea for me. But what about my long-suffering Nancy? Nancy, was posing for Scott a horrible ordeal or merely a terrible ordeal?
It was not an ordeal at all. It was a pleasure.
This is the first time I've watched you paint. You know Nancy, but not really well, and I noticed that you talked to her and asked her all sorts of questions and really got to know her while you were painting her. I always thought of what you do as the loneliest activity in the world, but apparently not so.
No. I have an intense social life, but it has evolved steadily for 40 years into something deeply predicated on the work itself. And the people that I paint, I really do see as collaborators in making things, people that enable the work to happen. It is about painting, but it's also about them. One of my strategies long ago was learning to talk to people sitting for me. It has a double role. It partly distracts people from the tedium of sitting. If you're talking the whole time, you barely notice that you're sitting there. And the other thing is, everybody likes to talk about themselves. I exploit that to the hilt because folks don't get permission a lot, and I am all too willing. I really want to know because as a painter, I have no life. I mean, it's this. So I get to talk with people about lives far more interesting than mine, and they're relieved in maybe a kind of benignly therapeutic way to talk about things, and I'm fascinated, and best of all, talking with my sitters gets me out of my own head. Painting for me, because I've done it for so long, has become intensely physical. And it's almost like a baseball player or a cook. Suddenly this starts to become a lot about muscle memory. And that goes much better when I am not micromanaging the choices with every bit of doubt.
I asked him to explain his pictorial strategy to me.
If you could build a picture from big to little, you would actually be approximating something of the logic of the appearance. And so my practice has evolved a lot to see if I can keep the relationships as big as I can and look for what I would call affinities between things. So I'm putting Nancy's hair with that wall. I'm putting much of her face with the salmon color light and shadow of the chair. It does something that an abstract painter would want, which is to amplify the large structure of the picture, which is something that all painting, abstract or figurative, has in common, is that appetite.
And only after those large color relationships are established does he go for detail. He uses this forest before the trees strategy for still lives and cityscapes as well, but it's also key to capturing people. He waxed philosophical about how to get a painting to really look like somebody.
For many folks, likeness has to do with an inventory of how features look. It's amazing how extremely precise non-painters' understanding of likeness might be. The mouth is off or whatever it is. One way portraiture becomes especially important to me is because it matters that this somehow be right. I can run the algorithm of those likenesses in two directions. When I was young, the algorithm tended to move from features outward. But what you learn as a painter is rightness is so entangled with things that echo out from the features. The little bit of flesh appearing in the part, the cascade of hair over the dome of the skull, the sympathy of the color of the hair to that wall. Now I go from the likeness of things around the head to the features. That same thing operates when you're painting a still life or a cityscape. Even things like placing the windows on a building in sunlight is very like painting features on a face. You're trying to get something not so much to be named, but appear.
We live in an era where millions of selfies are taken every day. People will then augment their looks, make themselves more attractive than they actually are. What is the value of having a dispassionate observer just look at you and paint what he sees?
First of all, I don't think it's dispassionate. I tend to think that painting connects you with the beauty of the world in an especially comprehensive way. When I'm looking at a person, their presence becomes a perfume that starts to pervade the entirety of the pictorial project. It's almost like they emerge as continuous with the space they inhabit. Now, I don't think that contemporary culture imagines that relations could be so intrinsically beautiful that they should be left alone. We imagine innocently that if you can adjust this or that for what you think is the better, do it, and there will be no consequences to that. That any small adjustment is an independent activity. But when you're making works of art, everything is interdependent. This color becomes incredibly beautiful because of the way it's illuminated by this color that's bouncing up into that surface. Contemporary culture generates an intense sense of self-manufactured individuality by little manipulations of look and self-presentation. It's a very American thing to mass market the process of becoming an individual. And one of the weird things about portrait painting is it actually starts out more with the similarities of people one to another, the strange template a human face represents. The differences among human beings are not that great. A lot of what you're getting in a portrait is, first of all, an inventory of all the ways that we're kind of similar. And then out of that, there's a discovery of a unique fingerprint in an appearance, like a microspace that has to do with just a little bit higher up that way, a little farther over there, a little pinker there. Small things.
Scott, I understand that you mostly do portraits of people that you're friends with.
Yeah, because those are folks that I can get. It's a very rare person that really would want to sit for an artist like me. It is a big ask of someone, and many of those are people that I paid to sit for me, students or friends or models who I have relationships with, but I still insist on paying them. It's only fair if somebody's giving you their time that way. I like painting all comers, but I also need some sympathy with the process, some interest in being seen.
Scott, how's the pandemic affected you?
The hardest thing about the pandemic for me, I've had to curtail my use of models. So when I get somebody to come in and sit for me like Nancy, it's like a play date or something. It's fun.
When you say you pay your sitters, it makes me feel a little guilty. My first video about you scored me over 2 million views. But I'm going to make it up to you. First of all,
I refuse to accept my $500 sitter's fee.
And secondly, I'm going to ask all my fans in YouTube land to consider coming and sitting for you and just paying you for materials and time. Would you take that?
Well, maybe, but the thing is, I don't know how many takers you get, because the one thing is you have to come and sit.
Yeah, this isn't sending him a photo.
No. You got to come and be here. But if you're willing to come and sit, and we can reach an arrangement where that's not a hardship for you, and, yeah, I'll paint your portrait.
I'm telling you, this is a great deal. Scott is not a young man, and once they're gone, they really shoot up in value.
Yeah, right. Well,
and look at his arm. I thought it was paint. It was some kind of disease.
Yeah.
Final thing. Is it ethical to do a drawing of Paganini's gigantic proboscis nose, but have him straight on so you don't know that it's what it really is?
The great thing about being painted or drawn by a great artist like Ang is ethics doesn't enter into it. Because for a poet like Ang, it's all good. I don't think he would see Paganini's proboscis as a difficulty in any sense. But the question you raise is a serious one, because the weaker the artist, the more inclined they are to flatter, to hedge their bets in some way. And the stronger the artist, they have almost the grace to make anything good. The problem is some people just aren't open to that. They're saddled with too many prejudices about what would be beautiful.
Sounds like I have permission to really trash Scott Noel in this movie.
Make my day.
Make my day, as if I could even think of trashing my brilliant, though prematurely balding friend. A final note on my abiding respect for what Scott has done with his life. With a mouse and Photoshop, I can manipulate ones and zeros into a quick, shallow, and dishonest simulacrum of the world. What Scott does is totally different. He is an alchemist. By hand and mind, he transforms the physical substance of oil paint into a poetic expression of lived experience. His paintings are as honest as they are humane. They are art and they are life. Thanks, Scott, for a really wonderful afternoon.